this wonderful group we have here. We have Lisa Arafune, Mira, whenever she joins, Kimberly Gibson, Dorothy Jones-Davis, and here's Mira. So the presentation or the panel discussion is Be an AM Advocate, Empower Yourself to Influence Policy, and take it away, panel.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to a panel that I would be on or interested in or certainly moderating this time last year. Things happen, and all of a sudden you find yourself in your professional life doing things that you just never expected you would do, and welcome to additive manufacturing. I will be your moderator. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to quickly introduce all of my panelists who I'm just privileged and happy to call friends, as well as colleagues. I am Mara Hittner, by the way, VP of Strategic Partnerships for Matter Hackers. So I oversee the sales team and general strategy at Matter Hackers. I develop partnerships with public and private organizations, businesses and institutions that need 3D printers, materials, and training. I got a crash course in government relations for small businesses this past year, our military contracts, and every single human on this screen was there to just lift me up and help me. And I am so appreciative, and I am so happy to introduce them all to you. Starting with Lisa Arafune, who is the Director of Outreach at the Additive Manufacturing Coalition, who are awesome. Check them out. Join them. She knows her lobby, and she knows why it helps additive manufacturing. She's got an incredible pedigree. She was a Director of Federal Relations for Purdue University. She's provided management and advocacy consulting for STEM education associations with a focus on government relations. And she is also a career interventionalist. By the way, I'm going to put your website, lisaarafune.com.
Thank you.
So happy to have her on the panel. Kimberly Gibson, who is recently became the ecosystem director at America Makes. America Makes, also awesome. Go join them. I'm an ambassador myself. She served as the top advisor to the Ohio governor and lieutenant governor offices on issues related to energy, transportation, local government, and most recently was also chief of marketing and development for IC3D. This woman has seen the government, perspective and the small business perspective from lobbying experience. She's got a lot of information to share. And then last but not least, Dorothy Jones-Davis. She is currently the Chief Impact Officer at Kid Museum, but for the past number of years, she has selflessly been the Executive Director of Nation of Makers. She's advocacy for makers for years. She's worked with the Obama administration. She was a policy fellow at the National Science Foundation. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here at TIPE. I'm going to get into our first question. Why would anybody want to get involved in this work? I ask myself every day. Lisa, you want to take a first stab at this one?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do that. Well, as Mara has said, we are here to talk about influencing policy, which is also known as lobbying. And so, like she said, I have about 20 years of experience in academic, science and technology, and manufacturing, lobbying, and advocacy. And I estimate that I've made well over 1,000 congressional office visits. And these have been for so many different topics, ranging from university endowments, nuclear fission, immigration, college athletics, and of course, science funding, because that's my favorite. And I worked in the Indiana State Capitol, Capitol Hill in DC, and I worked by lobbying Capitol Hill. And, today I'm a co-founder of the Additive Manufacturing Coalition, like she said, an organization that represents additive manufacturing in DC. And in case you're wondering, lobbying or government relations really is just another form of external engagement. This is where we just focus on influencing policymaking, regulations, funding. And so why would you want to get involved with Congress is the big question, right? I have 4 answers for you. So my first would be, rules, regulations, policies. These things change frequently. And depending on what particular sector of manufacturing you might be in, you should be prepared to just speak up for changes that affect your work and affect your life. Secondly, I'd say procurement issues. So many of you probably work for companies that sell or contract with the federal government, and these procurement issues can be really complicated and burdensome. In additive manufacturing, we see that those procurement rules were written with traditional manufacturing in mind, and they were written for the really large manufacturers. So it can be really difficult for the small manufacturers, which are very common in additive, to crack into that procurement system at these agencies. Thirdly, I'd say funding for research or validation or for economic development or workforce projects. And depending on who you are, whether you're a research university or a company or an individual, federal funding for your organization could be critical to your success. And then understanding how the federal government decides to spend its money, how the money gets to that agency, how it gets spent, all that's really great to know. And it's even better if you can get involved in that process. And my final reason for you is for you and your family, because there are all sorts of reasons you should care: taxes, financial aid, social security, immigration, women's reproductive rights. So the concepts that we're talking about today, they can be applied to all of these different issues. It's not just for additive manufacturing. So remember, you all bring some level of knowledge about manufacturing, engineering, science, and technology that Congress just doesn't have. And they have really limited exposure to science and additive manufacturing. And because they don't know, they're really, really open to learning more, and they want you to be that subject matter expert. So that's my reasoning.
Thank you so much for that. Let's see. Let's go to Kimberly. As far as, you can also answer the question if you have something to add on why we want to get involved in this work, but also how do we do it?
Sure. Thanks, Mara. So I want to echo a lot of the things that Lisa said about why it matters. I mean, first and foremost, you're a citizen, and then you have a series of things that you do and things that you know. And honestly, our elected representatives at whatever level of government are there to support you, but you have to tell them, you have to lean in on that. It is actually your right, your obligation as a citizen to do so. And I think what we're sharing here is certain ways to do it. So my background, and I started out in the Ohio General Assembly, and having done that, I got to see how legislation is made, and I've authored several pieces of legislation that is, and many policies that ended up being rulemaking at the cabinet level. So I've seen how things get done, and it starts with an idea. It starts with a phone call. It starts in some cases with a squeaky wheel, and I mean that in the best way possible. Now, I'm going to age myself here in a second by saying that when I was working in the legislative aid role, we used to get mail. Do you guys remember what physical mail is like? Okay. Yeah. Okay. See, I know. No, email was not a thing. I'll just say it that way. Not that it didn't exist, but it wasn't a thing. So I used to go as that legislative aide. I'd go to the mailbox and I'd get the mail. And then I would take a ruler and I would measure the mail. Yes, no, other. And I would be able to say to my member when she came in that week for the different votes that we had, well, we got a foot of mail pro and 6 inches of mail con. At some level, when you have so many people coming at you, you have to find ways to count it. And so when you differentiate yourself by a personal visit, some way to communicate, going to an event in the district, you're a citizen of their area. You need to go visit them. And as a lobbyist, and I know all of you can say this, go to them when you don't have something you want, just to get to know them. Because if you're only showing up when you need something, that's okay, because that's their job to listen to you. But you should make sure that you're going, and also trying to get to know them as a human, because we're all imperfect that are just trying to do our very best. And I think that on the good side, we can all take rip a page from the playbook. The things that Lisa shared, that's why you should do it. But at the same time, also do your homework. There are a panoply of resources out there to understand the different positions on issues. You can just go and be a citizen and say, hey, Representative Senator such and such, here's what I think. Great, you should do that. You should also research it. Do they have a position? Are people that they're aligned with, do they have a position? Or does my professional organization that I'm a part of, have they taken a position? And then, do a little research, do a little homework. So you can counter any opposition and be mindful of it and present yourself very professionally, even as a citizen. So there's lots of ways to go about it, but I'd say treat them like a human being, even their staff. And we're going to hear about that. Staff matter. Staff are doing the work. So I'll say to you, when I started my career in public service in the legislature, I was 25. And I was writing laws. I was doing testimony. 25. It's the same on Capitol Hill, right, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It sure is.
Same.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking to 25-year-olds. And if you get to a committee person, then they might be 30s or 40. They might have some gray hair, maybe. So just know that going in. And it's not an insult. It's just the way it works. So present yourself well, do your homework, and treat everyone like a human, like you're building a relationship.
So interesting, because it really is about building relationships. It's basically sales or business development, but it seems so intimidating to those of us that never took a public policy class. I didn't study poli-sci. I literally looked up in LinkedIn and Coursera to see if there was a course I could take in federal relations. Nope. There's one thing from in a school in India, and then another one from a school in Utrecht. And that's about it. How did you tell us your story? How did you get involved?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually sort of started to foray into policy. So my background is as a neuroscientist. So I have a PhD in neuroscience, and I actually came to the DC area as a policy fellow for the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences Policy Fellowship. And we had there's a week-long course you take where you learn about appropriations and how everything works, and you're sort of drinking from the fire hose. And it was a little overwhelming at first. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to talk to these really, senior people. And then you realize, as Kimberly said, you actually talk to their staffers, which are a little closer in age to you and that are sometimes much younger than you. But that there's so many resources out there. I think the number one thing that intimidates people into going into doing any of this work is just a fear of not knowing, right? So I think the reality is, and Kimberly sort of alluded to this, we're at a very different place in history. You can look up any bill. You can look up the history of that bill, where it came from, who started the conversation. You can do all the research on all the different staffers in a particular organization. There's just so much information out there and so much publicly available information. That information was always publicly available, but because of technology, now it's much more publicly available in a much more accessible form. So you just have an opportunity to learn a lot more about what's going on and to be educated. And so then you're able to come, to the table with some information. I think, being a policy fellow, one of the things I learned is, brevity is important. As I think both Kimberly and Lisa alluded to, I mean, the folks that are staffers in these offices only have a limited amount of time. They have a lot of different, as Lisa sort of said, right? Even when you're a lobbyist, right, you have all these different things that you're trying to cover, right? It's the topic of the day. It may change. It may be the topic of the hour, the topic of the minute. minute, right? So even with an additive, which we think of as a somewhat narrow field, there are different concerns for different stakeholders. And so, you know, when you go to someone, you want to have your information together, you want to have yourself prepared, but you don't want to be intimidated. These are everyday humans that happen to work for congressmen and congresswomen across the different aisles. And so, you know, they're there to do that work to help push forward the work of that office and to push forward legislation. And so if you have an opinion, if you have some information that is novel information that maybe is a viewpoint as a stakeholder, as an individual that is unique, if you have, you know, an example of how this is actually impacting you in your actual region, those are the kinds of things they get really excited about. So
Stories,
it sounds
narratives, right, Dorothy? Narrative,
right? You're telling
stories.
your story, your lens, your unique lens. You're coming to the world. You're coming to any particular issue with your own view. That may be a compelling story about how this issue has impacted you. If you're a smaller manufacturer, for example, you know, you may say, you know, here's how this particular legislation may drive me out of business, right? This may, or how it will help to bolster all the work and allow me to keep my employees, allow me to further my my work, to further my innovation. And so you just want to be able to compile that information. But the lucky thing is that it's pretty simple to do that because that information is out there. So, I mean, I had a little bit of background and help. I wasn't completely you know, thrown into the tank like you were, Mara, but you know, it still is a learning curve. And I think the biggest hurdle to get over is your own self, your own notion that you can't do this, because any one of you that are in the audience, you are able to be an advocate. You're able to be a lobbyist. One quick thing I do want to say is, because I'm representing sort of the nonprofit world here on this panel, having come from Nation of Makers previously, and my current position is also a nonprofit. You can, in fact, lobby as a nonprofit. It is a false notion that you cannot. There is a limit. And you just want to be careful that you're limiting yourself and you're not doing, if most of your time is being spent lobbying, you cannot do that. However, you can spend up to, it's a certain actual dollar amount, more than a percentage, but it's a percentage of that dollar amount. So 20% of the first, I think, $500,000 is, I think, the cutoff by the US tax or the federal like guidelines for that. So it is a falsehood that you can't advocate as a nonprofit. As a matter of fact, you should advocate for your nonprofit, and you should partner with other organizations that are advocacy organizations, that are lobbying organizations, and that are for-profit organizations as well, to push forward a common agenda. So that's actually how we all met, is that we've been working together for a while now, crossing over in different ways in this crazy world of advocacy and lobbying.
And there have been some, thank you so much, Dorothy. And I just quickly want to acknowledge, like, you know, even as a nonprofit, when you couldn't be lobbying yourself during the pandemic, you took your time to stay weekly policy classes for small businesses and maker spaces and, you know, interested parties to learn how to like actually write these policy proposals and mystify this whole thing. So it just, you know, for that. And you and I are going to a minute about more about what small businesses and large businesses can do lobbying. But I first want to kind of get back to, when we talk about lobbying, which, by the way, may need a reframe because it's like it sounds like a dirty word. I don't know. It's really storytelling. It's storytelling, and it's asking for money, and it's being a resource for people that are responsible for literally all of the money in the country and where to put it. And they can't, no, they're not specialists about anything. So they actually really do need us. They need our help. They need our expertise. They need our stories of how additive manufacturing, for example, is affecting people in their district. So let's have one job, keep jobs in their district. They have those jobs, pay enough money that people can have a good house, good life, and make all the babies and have all the jobs. Like, That's kind of right. I don't know. That's what I've learned in my first year of lobby school. So it's really about taking what it is that you need to keep your business alive in your district and talking to the person that holds those purse strings and being like, look, here's what I need to do. Here's what's missing in your district. Here's why I'm going to solve that problem. Here's how I'm going to do it and who I'm going to do it with, and how much money I need for you to, put into this bucket. So before,
I'll say, Mara, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I want to ask Kimberly and Lisa to, before we go into some more examples, thank you, little TED talk there. But I want to talk a little bit more about, like, if we're going to go, we need to know our audience, right? And our audience is changing. Our audience of who is in charge and who is holding those purse strings is changing. And I know Lisa, really interesting points that you wanted to bring up. So I'm going to say, Lisa, why don't you go ahead and take this one first, and then we'll flip back to Kimberly.
Sounds great. Well, in the 20 years that I've been working with Congress in so many different capacities, I have seen so much change in the government relations industry as well as in Congress itself. In terms of the government relations industry, I'd have to say that the number of women and lobbyists themselves has grown tremendously in some sectors. Yeah. I mean, I used to go to events and be the only or maybe one of the few women in the room. And in the last 10 years, I guess half that time, it's changed dramatically. And I'd have to say, especially in the university, the academic institution, government relations people, it's definitely more women than men that are lobbying for them. And then I'd have to say in Congress, we need to talk about that. So some historical perspectives. So think back to the 1970s. In 1977, there were 2 women in the Senate and 18 in the House for a total of 20 women. And then when I worked on the Hill in the late 90s, there were 9 women in the Senate, 56 in the House for a total of 65 women members of Congress. And then we had this running joke that there were more men named Jim or James in Congress than there were women. Well, I'm not sure if that's true or not yet anymore, but because I haven't actually counted the number of Jims. But today, there are 149 women serving in the 118th Congress of the United States. So of the 535 seats in Congress, women hold 149, which is nearly 28%. So that is a significant change from the 3.7% in 1977. So it's better than nothing. And can I just mention the other really, really exciting thing? It's just such an interesting development. I really haven't heard anyone talking about this yet, but the appropriations committees in the House and the Senate, these are the 2 most important committees around, okay? So they control the entire budget of the United States. So that's $6.27 trillion in 2022. Interestingly, it appears that the 4 chairs of the Appropriations Committee for the first time ever are all 4 women. So we have in the House,
Chairwoman. Money. Sorry.
money, right? So in the House, we have Chairwoman Kay Granger, a Republican from Texas, and her ranking member is Rosa DeLauro, a Democrat from Connecticut. And then in the Senate, we have Chairwoman Patty Murray. She's a Democrat from the state of Washington, and her vice chair is Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine. I mean, congratulations. I don't know what this means yet, but it's so interesting and it's really, really exciting. So
it's just different. And here's the thing, like, I know we have lots of female, male, all sorts of identifying non-binary that are watching this. And it's about, it's like, ideally we want, I don't know, what, one of each, 50-50, like we want all the different viewpoints, all the different backgrounds, but in order to even get there, we may have to go a little bit, outside. But the point is that change is possible, and new viewpoints and new ways of doing things are possible. So this, please, we're not saying that only one viewpoint should be heard in any given thing. It's just a signifier that more people are being invited to the party. Party's going to get bigger, not political party, but like, the metaphorical party. More people, the better. And this is just really interesting and really different. It's a shift.
It is a shift, and it's an important one. Once we become more inclusive in our state and federal legislatures, the perspectives that are granted can be better, and the laws that are made can be better and stronger. And I think we all have experienced that in our worlds, our respective companies, that the more diversity of opinion and perspective we have, it makes us stronger and able to weather many more difficulties when they come. And also, there's something to be said for, the shared values. And I think that's been a struggle for us as a nation. But I think seeing that diversity in our Congress and our state legislatures and the governors across the country is making a very big difference. And I mean, it's great to have grown up. When I started in the Ohio General Assembly, women there was a sweeping of the legislature because we just put term limits in place at the state level. So that meant all the old people were time limited. So they had to get some fresh blood in there, and there were 22 women that came, the 9 Democrats and 13 Republicans, and number of years, and then we saw a dip as those women left. And I'm saying women because they were really tired of the way things were being handled, and they're like, I can't do this anymore. So many of them left because they just couldn't do it anymore. And that only lasted for a short time, and then they were right back in it. Different women were right back in it. And so now Ohio has 33 women out of 99. So pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
It's pretty nice. So again, it changes, it ebbs and flows, guys, but here we are. We're in the middle of it, and there's so many great things. And I think as a small business, if you're a small business, a large as you are, show who you are and show up. Most importantly, show up. And I think Dorothy and Mara would agree. You want to invite people to your place. Let them see what you do. The good, bad, the ugly, whatever it is. Show them what you're doing. Show them what it looks like. Be real. Yeah, you might have to sweep the floor a little bit, make it clean, but you should really
show up.
Yeah.
They show up. I remember I was doing a STEM presentation or a workshop at a school, and I invited a Congressman Takano, and he came with cameras and participated in the workshop and spoke to the kids and spoke to the teacher, and he didn't have that experience to pull from before. I want to get into a couple of success stories because I know we're running out of time here. We got about 15 minutes. But for me, I got into this because Matter Hackers got this awesome military contract, and it's a 5-year contract. And after year 2, the funding, I figured, we got a contract, the funding should be there. That's the way the world works, right? Nope. Turns out that's not always the way it works. And there was some hiccups with approving some of the other funding. And it was a very important program, getting 3D printers and materials and training fielded to Navy and Marines. And a lot of people that felt very passionately about it. And so I started making calls to LAs and getting on video calls and explaining to them, back to Ellen's talk earlier about telling your story, not saying I need money because I'm a small business and I'm going to go broke, but this program needs to be funded because the government has already invested in getting these 3D printers out there. We want to keep them up and running. We want to be able to do the maintenance and sustainment. We want to be able to train the service people moving forward to be able to keep them running over the years. Even once this program is done, they should still be able to use the equipment. And really making a case for why this funding is important. You approved it at one point. What changed your mind? And how can I help to keep this sort of on track? And there are a number of success stories. Dorothy, you want to talk about the Maryland?
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of something you just said, which is also if you have data, folks in Congress love data. Their staffers love data. The more data you have, the better. So I think Kimberly said something good, which is like, show them the money, right? Like bring them to your location, show them what you're doing. But also if you have data, it really goes a long way. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a Senate bill that was here in Maryland where I live, Senate Bill 453. And this is in the state legislature. And this bill actually is a bill for a network of maker spaces. And that term is a more loose term. It's literally a space where you could make, so it doesn't encompass manufacturing spaces as well, to sort of network those spaces and to provide more resources. And the reason why this was actually something that was started and why folks were invested in it was the data, right? So during COVID-19, as many of you know, makers came in full force. And so when makers heard that, folks were having challenges finding the right, respiratory protection to make sure that the virus didn't spread, they went out en masse and started making personal protective equipment. So you had folks that were 3D printing new innovative masks and, creating face shields and creating other types of personal protective equipment all around the world. Millions and millions of pieces of, tens of millions of pieces of PPE were made across the world. And this was something that was coordinated by a number of different organizations. I was honored that Nation of Makers was part of it, but so was Open Source Medical Supplies was really championing it, as well as some other organizations. And based on that success, there was, it was identified, hey, folks that are doing manufacturing, even small batch, when they all work together, guess what? They have a really big impact, and they fix supply chain failures, right? That was the whole thing. That was the whole reason why we couldn't get, everything from face masks to toilet paper, was because supply chains were screwed up during COVID-19. And in some ways they still are. So the question is, well, how can we leverage what we know was a success with maker groups to have them more ready for the next, whatever the next big disaster, the next big thing that happens? How do we create networks of spaces across the country and across the world that can do this work? And so Maryland, a bunch of folks in Maryland said, hey, we want to start that here in Maryland. And so I'm very proud that Maryland is the first state to have passed such legislation. I'll put the link in so folks can look at it. But it really was, a labor of love. Really, one of our maker spaces here, OpenWorks, in Baltimore, Maryland, Will Holman, who's the executive director there, really spearheaded just getting out there and talking to his local. He started out with the local folks, his local legislators, and had them come to a space, see the space, experience different programming, see what production looks like, understand what the dynamics were, understand what the limits were, right? Where there is a need for funding, right? Like, here's where we ran into an issue. Here's where we could use not only funding, but also, it's also great to advocate for what other services you could use, right? So it might be a connection. Like, it would be really great if we were plugged into, the state's manufacturing supply, chain, or, it would be really great if we were linked into, getting supplies, the wholesale materials. We could get discounts for wholesale materials like other manufacturers do. So that really, really helps a lot. And so that was really a success because in large part, it wasn't as many larger organizations coming together. It was some of the smaller manufacturers and maker spaces that came together to make that into a reality.
Yeah, it's a huge piece of legislation. A small piece of legislation is a huge impact and a huge example of how literally a makerspace could make such a difference. I'm going to make mine super short. I was going to talk about Project Diamond, and I'll put some information in the chat. But a business got funded by a $10 million grant. This was in Michigan. $10 million grant from Oakland County and a $2 million grant from Macomb County to basically put 3D printers in training into 200 small businesses that were able to use those printers for whatever they wanted. And then if there was a a local supply chain issue, or the government needed to sort of commandeer those printers to print PPE, or what they ended up doing was parts for the Ukraine, that the government would be able to kind of take them over, have these businesses do the localized distributed manufacturing. And then once that crisis was done, they get their free 3D printers back. And it was hugely impactful for these small businesses. Many of them, like, they were manufacturers, but many of them hadn't even thought about 3D printing because they thought it was too expensive, too hard. We don't know how to get into it. We don't know why we would use it. We don't know if we have the right staff to use it. So it was a really great use case of, if you provide the equipment and specifically the training, and this is what we found with the military as well, people get fired up. And as you all know, because you're here at TIPE, once you've made your first 3D printed thing, you're done. You're done. And if you designed that thing, you're a lifer. You're ours for life. You're never going anywhere else. That's right. I'll put some links in the chat for that. But I would love to hear. We also want to talk about national strategy for additive manufacturing.
Can I add on to what you just said, Mara, about Project Diamond?
Yeah.
Another one of the fun things that came out of it is that a lot of those small businesses that got to practice with, you know, a relatively simple machine and start making things, they started to realize, oh, what else could I do with this? Maybe I should try these other kinds of printers. And so they've actually gone on to buy more expensive and like metal printing and different kinds of printing, and they're expanding their businesses. And so the economic development boom that has come out of a small business just starting with a simple machine with simple ideas and helping and realizing they can do a whole lot more for their actual business has been just tremendous. And that's been another really great outcome of that simple government grant.
I think we only have 2 more minutes if I'm doing my math right, but go ahead.
I can, or this, is it 2 minutes till Q&A or just in general?
Actually, our time is until 2:25.
I was going to say you have until 2:25.
I only see one question, and that was actually about let's just talk really quick about the national strategy. I'm going to put that in the chat.
Yeah, I would. There's lots of different ways that policies get made and decisions get made. Sometimes they come bubbling up from the bottom, kind of like Project Diamond, right? And then other times, and that's beautiful when that happens, but that's hard. It takes a lot. It's extraordinary when that happens. And it usually takes a lot longer than that took. Usually things come sort of top down, where you have, people who are smart and in think tanks and, advisors to the president or the governor who create these strategies. Well, that is most recently, I want to bring your attention to the National Strategy for Advanced Manufacturing. And I'm going to put a link here in the chat.
I put the link in the chat.
Oh, you just did. Lisa took care of it. Thank you, Lisa. So this is a policy document that if you've not seen it, you should take a look. I guarantee you, if you're in this business, there's something in there that you care about. And wield this when you go to lobby, present your company's opinion or your personal opinion about the different things that are happening. Just know when that happens at the top level, the cabinet level agencies, Mara's got that great, yeah. So the cabinet level agencies have requirements. They're being held to a standard, to the things that are in that document to some extent. So when you have that and you can speak to it, you can say how your approach might actually solve some of the problems in there. So this is just one example of one policy document that, which there are many, both at the agency level or in Congress. You should take a look, see if you fit inside it, and then that might be a launching off point for you. And I will say that with respect to the AM Coalition, of which Lisa is a founding member, and America Makes, we work together. We care deeply about these issues. We care deeply about you, and any one of us on this panel can support you and point you in the right direction if you have any questions about how to get something done, how to find a resource, or just in general what needs to happen. So I'll leave it and open up for questions.
Yeah, it looks like there's
one question for Dorothy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's one question there about whether or not If you're a nonprofit, do you need to be bipartisan in your communications? Turns out federal tax code does restrict you from being partisan as a nonprofit. So you cannot be partisan. You cannot support a particular candidate in as a nonprofit, or else you'll be violating the federal tax code there. But so certainly you want to be bipartisan, but if there's somebody who, for example, a leader in Congress puts forth a bill, you can still support the work towards that bill. You can educate. One quick thing I wanted to say just quickly to differentiate between lobbying and advocacy. So lobbying is really specific to asking for a particular vote or asking for a particular, and Lisa, like, correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding is that and same Kimberly, that lobbying is really asking for a specific, vote or action of a member of Congress. Where you're doing advocacy, it's really education. So most of us should, at the very least, everyone in this room should be an advocate for the work that you're doing, right? And the things that you're passionate about, as Lisa said at the top of this call or at the top of this meeting. But in addition, if you have a particular, some legislation happening, again, if you're a nonprofit, you can support that work. Up to 20% of that first, $500,000 of your dollars can be used towards that. And if you have any questions about that, you can certainly do a Google search and get more details there. And I'm happy to talk to anyone as well. And I'm sure Lisa, Kimberly, and Mara also would be. Did I say that correctly, Lisa and Kimberly?
That was good.
Okay.
In the 3 minutes we have left, I just want to say thank you for everybody that's watching. This could be its own conference, obviously, but if you see yourself anywhere in this conversation, all of our LinkedIn's in the chat, so please do reach out to us. We would love to talk to you and see if we can help each other, because it is going to take the entire community and the entire industry to really move the needle, and have people that would have no need to understand additive manufacturing have them actually understand the benefits of additive manufacturing. Anybody want to say a couple of words to close out?
Actually, you've got a question in the chat. If you and the panel want to take this is the last question. And this person is not sure if this is the appropriate group to ask, but how do you handle situations where someone in your industry or workplace continually attempts to dismiss your ideas and overpower your voice?
Well, that's never happened to me before. I mean, has that ever happened to you?
It has happened to all of us, Kimberly. I can admit it. Yes, that's one of the very complicated things. And there are lots of different visibility types of things that you can do for yourself to advocate for yourself, because advocacy isn't just about advocating for your organization. It's about advocating for yourself and expressing your ideas and being heard. Being heard is really, really important and valuable. And there are, there's a story about the Obama White House. There were women that were in the White House that their ideas just weren't being heard. And so they started repeating after each other. They came together and they said, you know what, you're going to present an idea, and I am going to say your name, and I'm going to present that idea and refer back to your idea. And so I'm blanking on what the terminology is for that, but there's a word for it. And it's just, it worked. And ideas from the women started to float up in the White House.
And I
There's
think
White House, Washington Post article on that.
Yeah, I think that the tips that we're telling you for sort of the organizational level definitely still work for you at the personal level. So, make sure you have all your arguments together. Make sure, as Lisa said, you have allies, and that's the same for at the organizational level. You want to get together allies, people who are going to keep saying the same thing. And then that congressional leader's like, hey, I've heard this 27 times this week. This must be really important to my constituents, because you're a constituent, right? So the same is true for your own personal conversations, right? You want to have people that are doing that echoing back and forth and really supporting you. Find your tribe, find people that are going to stand up for you as well. And if you find yourself in a situation, we're not advocating for you to quit your job, especially given the last talk. You should not quit your job until you have another one. We learned that in the last talk. But you know, if you are in a hard situation, it is something to think about. Is this an environment where you can thrive and where you feel supported? There are amazing environments where women can thrive in additive. And so, you know, this conference is a great place to meet some of those women and men and individuals that are working at those organizations that would be happy to support your way of thinking, your ideas. So definitely use this opportunity to network.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, speakers. Mara, Dorothy, Kimberly, Lisa, appreciate your time.